I'm Dr. Walt Miner. I'm here to talk about LSD. The reason I'm talking about LSD is that I'm trying to counteract a lot of the popular publicity that you're reading about this material.
Well, I'm terribly frightened by the problem of LSD. I think there's been a great deal of misinformation by those who seem to see no harm in it. But as a parent and as a citizen, and certainly now in this position, I am greatly concerned. Others immediately have a great problem. There is a residual effect that this can come back with what might be permanent brain damage months after even just a single use of it. The misinformation from those who should know better is that it isn't harmful, that it sort of opens up the mind, that it's we're even seeing some of our young people told it's a worthwhile experiment for them to indulge in this. There is nothing smart, there's nothing grown up or sophisticated in taking an LSD trip at all. They're just being complete fools.
Know what this war on drugs was really all about?
Federal spending for local law enforcement will double.
The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying?
There can be no progress in America without respect for law.
We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
But I think our only hope lies in a concerted effort of education.
Presenting the bad science behind psychedelic discourse. What are psychedelics?
A psychedelic is a substance containing a chemical compound which produces a surreal, altered state of reality within the user, also known as a hallucinogen. Hallucinogens are widely used by both drug abusers and people of traditional cultures who ingest these substances for religious or healing purposes. In order to analyze the potential of these compounds, this presentation will be focusing specifically on their supposed healing purposes. As stated by classical hallucinogens and neuroimaging, hallucinogenic therapy has been indicated as helpful for a range of substance use disorders, yet this approach remains understudied and publicly unavailable. It is nonetheless a promising treatment which has significant long-term beneficial effects with single doses and a profile that is characterized by general safety, low toxicity, and non-addictiveness. Some examples of commonly used hallucinogenic drugs are LSD, psilocybin, and peyote.
Classified as a Schedule I drug, hallucinogens are deemed highly dangerous and addictive with no medical uses. The stigma surrounding hallucinogens is rampant. Substances that were once used in widespread healing rituals are now characterized by those who abuse them and those who seek to benefit politically from their banning. The stigma is that hallucinogens are exclusively used as party drugs and have no real-world benefit. The media is largely at fault for popularizing single case studies and falsely claiming mass acid casualties in the 1960s, points out a professor at UCLA. Another stigma is that the use of said drug could cause psychosis. Two recent studies published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology found no link between the use of psychedelics and psychosis. These studies even found lower lifetime rates of suicidal thoughts and attempts. This isn't to say that there aren't harmful side effects of using these substances in medicine, but through further research, these side effects can be mitigated and proper dosage can be confirmed. A little historical context is important in the modern explanation of why systemically there is a stigma against the use of hallucinogens. In the 1960s, the counterculture movement arose. This movement arose as a protest of the Vietnam War. This movement was highly anti-establishment and anti-commercialism, and pro-peace. In the mid-1950s, research started on the potential use of psychedelics in medicinal settings. Despite positive results, President Nixon's war on drugs ended up fostering the criminalization of all psychedelics and hallucinogens. As a result, the government stopped funding such research and institutions backed out to maintain credibility. Today, studies showing the positive effects of psychedelics in treating depression, anxiety, and PTSD are re-emerging.
In his Journal of Psychedelic Studies paper titled Evidence for Entheogen Use in Prehistory and World Religions, Michael Winkelman provides a substantial amount of evidence which suggests that the history of psychedelics is deeply intertwined with the history of humanity. This is demonstrated foremost by archaeological evidence of fungi-form petroglyphs, rock artifacts, and mythologies from all major regions of the world that, one way or another, pertain to psychedelia. Unfortunately, even though these past cultures played a fundamental role in the formation of human history, Western culture today has all but suppressed this history. As Winkelman states, we know this because the Western encounters with the indigenous use of psilocybin mushrooms by Mesoamerican cultures was reported from the cultural distance of Spanish invaders, whose accounts by Catholic priests were severely distorted by their ideological views of these practices as involving witchcraft. Their neurotic biases ultimately served to rob us from achieving a more developed understanding of our past, as the violent oppression of these practices led to their virtual extinction in most of Mexico. When one looks at the war on drugs from this angle, it becomes quite easy to view the U.S. government as a medium by which the colonial violence of the past was patriotically propagated. Thus, the anti-indigenous and anti-terrestrial prejudices of the past were kept alive with the same fear-mongering biases that compelled the colonial conquistadors to make their own oppressive judgments. As psychedelics continue to reemerge, it is beyond critical for the scientific discourse to acknowledge the fact that the U.S. government was given a chance at historical redemption and yet miserably failed to step up to the plate. So, as science continues to prove all the benefits of psychedelia, we should not be so lazy as to ignore the consequences of the previous prejudices of the past.
How do hallucinogens affect mental health? It has been found that the serotonergic hallucinogens like LSD, psilocybin, and peyote have some positive effects on the mental state of lab subjects. A research study produced by Schmid and Leichte in 2017 revealed the effects of LSD based on a persisting effects questionnaire, PEQ, mysticism scale, MS, death transcendence scale, DTS, and Neo 5-factor inventory. These 4 scales measured, in this experiment, the effect of LSD on both short and long-term mental health efficiency as compared to the absence of LSD use. The Persisting Effects Questionnaire is a series of questions that measured the subject's moods, behavior, and social experiences after LSD treatment. The Mysticism Scale is a second questionnaire used to evaluate the types of experiences that subjects encountered during LSD treatment. The Death Transcendence Scale is a third questionnaire used to measure the different aspects of transcending the concept of death. The Neo 5-factor inventory is a fourth questionnaire used to measure personality traits in lab subjects, including the absence or presence of common mental health disorders. The 2 most telling tests of improving mental health were the PEQ and the MS scales. The PEQ data shown here is compiled from Schmid and Leichte's experiment and displays the mean scores for the subjects in regards to positive and negative effects of treatment. Ratings of positive attitudes about life and or self, positive mood changes, altruistic or positive social effects, and positive behavioral changes significantly increased at the 1 and 12-month follow-ups compared with the assumption of no change. Based on this, lab subjects experienced better moods, habits, and social interactions at 1 month and continued to grow in these areas 12 months after the laboratory project. The important data to note is the low mean scores for negative effects. Most subjects experienced very little negative effects 1 month after treatment, even less at 12 months after treatment. This data suggests LSD to be a viable treatment for the mental health of the average citizen who may have a negative life experience overall. The MS data shown here is also compiled from Schmid and Leichte's experiment and shows the mean scores for introvertive and extrovertive mysticism experienced for lab subjects during LSD treatment. Introvertive mysticism is feeling as if everything within the body and mind is in harmony. Extrovertive mysticism is feeling as if everything in the surrounding world is in harmony. According to the study, the introvertive and extrovertive mysticism factor scores significantly increased at 1 and 12 months compared with pre-LSD screening. Significantly increased scores for both experiences compared to pre-LSD screening reveals a strong sense of grounding among subjects after LSD treatment, and therefore an increased amount of mental stability and comfort in individual surroundings. Outside of Schmid and Leichte's experiment, psilocybin, when compared to a second hallucinogen, dimethyltryptamine, DMT, produced relatively greater visual, mystical type, insightful, and musical experiences. These experiences were measured among previous hallucinogen users and were monitored only in the short term. However, in the lab, it was found that 20 and 30 milligrams per 70 kilogram doses of psilocybin improved the subject's sense of pure being and awareness, sense of reverence or sacredness, and timelessness, all of which allow subjects to escape their own reality and find a higher meaning. Peyote, used primarily among Native American communities, is a traditional hallucinogen used for religious and spiritual purposes. A study ran by John H. Halpern and his research team tested peyote users, former alcoholics, and a control group who were non-users, using a myriad of demographic and psychological tests. The most important of these was the RAND Mental Health Inventory, which found no evidence of psychological or cognitive deficits among Native Americans using peyote regularly in a religious setting. In a few of these tests, highlighted in green, peyote users even scored higher than the control group. Because peyote was so often used in daily rituals, and there is virtually no difference between users and non-users psychologically, there must be no immediate danger to the peyote user. How does hallucinogen treatment compare to other psychological treatment? Addressing the issue of substance abuse and addiction, a second research study directed by Burdick and Adanoff proposes that current treatments for addiction are frequently ineffective. Hallucinogenic therapy has been indicated as helpful for a range of substance use disorders, yet this approach remains understudied and publicly unavailable. In the abstract, they mention that the use of hallucinogens is often safer, less toxic, less addicting, and more effective than talk therapy or antipsychotic drugs. The reason that hallucinogens may be a better treatment plan than the current treatment for individuals with addictive tendencies is because the hallucinogens help navigate the individual through their shame and guilt while remaining fully engaged. This method is similar to talk therapy, where individuals process their trauma with a third party, but it removes the aspect of shyness or insecurity in front of others, which might be preventing that individual from being honest about their experiences. Secondly, the mysticism scale of the hallucinogen allows the individual to experience a kind of religiosity and spiritual stimulation. This aids in the treatment of addiction because religiosity is a protective factor in drug habit formation. Although this occurrence may not be the end-all be-all to the addiction, it does increase spiritual health and may give addicted individuals a higher meaning that they otherwise would not identify with.
Clearly, there has been a lot of research behind the benefits of psychedelics for decades. However, it's been halted for many reasons. This graph demonstrates an increase in articles about hallucinogens in the late 60s and early 70s, then the harsh fall immediately after. This all relates back to bad science because there was confirmatory research that psychedelics were useful and beneficial in many categories, but its stigma and association with other drugs led to halt of research. One element of bad science is the cherry-picking of results. After the war on drugs, the media only covered biased information. For example, they would only share anecdotes of people's bad experiences with LSD. The media's perceptions caused readers of any research to be wary because they had preconceived images of psychedelics after the fact. Rather than listening to research or putting new research to be sure if psychedelics were dangerous, people came to that conclusion without proper evidence or considering all the research out already. The importance of this issue lies in the number of lives that could be saved with further research. This graph shows the number of people, x-axis, that suffered with mental health illnesses, y-axis, and other addictions in 2017 at a staggering 950 million people globally for mental health illnesses. Many of those suffering end up losing their lives while trying to battle their addictions or illnesses. There have already been studies showing that use of psychedelics are useful for these issues, and if research was implemented, millions of lives could have been saved. Valuable information has and continues to be suppressed, and that element of bad science in this issue has led to the loss of lives that could have otherwise been prevented.
Psychedelic drugs are being studied more than they ever were before. Psilocybin is actually one of the more favorable psychedelic drugs. Thousands of years of anecdotal evidence, in addition to modern-day scientific studies, confirm that psilocybin has low physiological toxicity, low abuse/addictive liability, safe psychological responses, no associated persisting adverse physiological or psychological effects during or after use. The risks that are associated with these drugs can be prevented with a medically supervised setting rather than recreational use. While people can be addicted to these drugs, a controlled non-recreational setting is the appropriate measure to obtain positive side effects such as reduced anxiety, depression, and OCD. Science is readily available to highlight the misconception that has kept these drugs from making a breakthrough in religious and medical practices.